Hi everybody, welcome to our newest minisode. We have Fee and Kevin joining us today. Fee is one of our very own from Beta Change, who's been living with diabetes for 30 years and is a diabetes nurse educator in Melbourne, Australia. Her dad is also by her side today, and he's been with her since diagnosis, obviously, and accumulated a wealth of knowledge when it comes to traveling with diabetes through their many adventures. We're so excited to have them here today to share their experiences and some tips about being prepared to travel with diabetes. So welcome, Fiona and Kevin.
Hi.
Thanks, Nate. How are you?
Good. So let's kick off and tell us about some of the places that you have travelled to in the past since Fiona's diabetes diagnosis.
Just before we were going to mainland China, Fiona became diagnosed with diabetes, so we had to postpone that for 12 months, and then we took her and her not daughter, but her sister to mainland China and to Hong Kong. And after that, we also travelled to places like Indonesia, Jakarta, Mulu Caves over in Borneo, America. We've been to Brunei, into Kota Kinabalu, and most of our travel is off-road travel, off-track travel. So therefore, we had to be pretty prepared to cope with both Fiona's diagnosis of diabetes and also her asthma, but also my wife has severe asthma as well. But it's all achievable.
So, Ash, what was hilarious is that, after diagnosis, you think Mum might have taken us and Dad would have taken us to a resort or a five-star place. But no, we had to go trekking through the Borneo jungle or into mainland China with huts with manure all around them. You've got to remember, I was diagnosed 30 years ago, so things are very, very different today.
And when we landed in Hong Kong, there was only one location that we could buy food for Fiona, and that was a 7-Eleven. And there was only one McDonald's as well.
Wow, so things have definitely changed in those 30 years. So walk us through how you would typically travel for, how you typically prepare for travel and what is involved in that preparation.
So with travel, we look at starting about 3 to 6 months out. And 30 years ago, Dad would start planning about 12 months ago. What's really interesting is when we were chatting last night is that Dad was actually saying that it actually went back to his father, who was actually in World War II in the Light Horse. And I remember my grandfather sharing stories that whenever they were on their horses, they had to have enough food for their whole battalion. So they were always prepared. Little did he know that, 60 years later, that his granddaughter would actually take a lot of that on board as well. He then, when his dad, do you want to tell the story about when you used to travel and all the preparation Pop used to do for that?
Yeah, and in my when Dad had a belief that we had to go on holidays, and it wasn't just around the corner. So, and we also had to go to our relatives, and that meant a trip leaving Geelong at about 1 o'clock in the morning and travelling until midday to a place called Wangaratta. And in those days, the vehicles weren't very reliable, so we had extra tyres, we had extra tubes, we had containers of fuel, we had containers of water, we had boxes of food, and it was like, you were travelling with a lot of stuff. And then later on the year, he would take us to Warrnambool, which is about 4 hours modern driving away from Geelong. And again, he would ban us from his workshop around about Easter time, and we wouldn't go until Christmas time, because in his workshop he would have things stored. He'd have tent poles, he'd have the tent, he'd have all containers of fuel, and he would gradually collect all of that and then load it onto a trailer, and off we would go for our annual holiday in Warrnambool. So I became very used to thinking of and preparing to do things. It didn't matter what I did, Dad would always do that to us.
Dad, your best preparation actually was for diabetes was when you went to work in PNG, because I think that prepared you most for getting a child diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
Yeah, in New Guinea I was what they call a KIAP, I had magisterial and police powers, and my responsibility was to assist the locals to come to grips with our Western world. And we would go out on patrol, and that meant walking into the distant villages, maybe anywhere from a fortnight to 4 weeks. And once we walked in, we had to walk out. There was no other way. So we had to carry all of our food, any medical supplies we needed, and it had to be quite compact because it was carried. So the locals who would assist us and carry our packs of food and supplies for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever it was, um, the supplies were all had to be split because in that hiking we would be going around difficult mountain tracks. We'd also be travelling across wide rivers in very narrow boats. And if one of our containers got lost, then overboard, then we would be in trouble. So everything was split so that we had supplies with us. Once you're in the jungle there was no 7-Eleven, there was no McDonald's. You either ate your food or you ate the local food, which of course would be severely contaminated with bacteria and that which we weren't used to. And so that sort of taught us. But the other thing was that the locals themselves, they always had a little bag made of papaya leaf. And in that bag was their very essentials. So they could survive, it didn't matter where they went, they could survive. And they always carried their hatchets so that they could cut down trees or cut whatever they want from the forest to survive. But they never went without this little bag, and in that bag was their most critical items that they needed to survive. So that's where that's my first travel pack.
So Dad,
That's amazing.
So Dad, we then went the first trip. As I said, you decided to go somewhere that wasn't, really civilized when we first went off 30 years ago. What did you do as far as packing? Can you share? Because it's quite hilarious. Where we were 30 years ago to today and what we packed back then and what you did was really forward-thinking beyond belief. What did you do?
Well, we have a pool room in our home, and Fiona and her sister used to get upset because it was banned from them for about 6 months, because on top of the pool table and underneath it and around it, I collected all the things that I needed and that we thought we needed. We kept researching, and every time we found something, it would go down onto the pool table. And then about a month before we were due to go away, we then had one of those lovely days where we just picked everything up and threw out everything that was totally unnecessary. It's in a box. Yeah, get rid of the box. Oh, it's in plastic. Get rid of the plastic. Do we need that? Do we? No. So that we eventually reduced the pool table and underneath the pool table into a couple of backpacks for Fiona and for her mother and for me and for her sister. We had everything split over 4 ways so that in that we also carried, for my wife, we carried an asthma pump, which in those days was quite a bit of weight and quite sizable. And we also carried several packs of power connections that were multi-purpose for all countries, so that we could always have access to power if we needed it.
That's amazing. So you are so prepared in your travel preparations, and I guess that comes from years and years of training, years and years of sort of planning and experiences as well. Were there any particular scenarios or experience that sort of changed some of those travel preparations, whether it's, we need to be more rigorous in this, or we need to start planning for this, or any of those scenarios that you would like to share with us?
That's a great one, Ash. I think it comes back to where Dad, my grandfather in World War II and what he was having to do to stay alive. Then I think what they had to do to travel on holidays, and then Dad in PNG. I think all that actually was their story behind it, because then all it is about packing with diabetes. So when you've got all the things that Dad's been talking about, when you're then living with diabetes, you've just got to pack extra insulin and you've just got to pack your blood sugar meters and all those things as well. But something we were talking about, which I find really fascinating now, is that I know I use the Mid-Angel and I also use the Frio bags to keep my insulin cool. 30 years ago, those things weren't around. And so, Dad, do you want to share some of the things that we did, especially Mulu?
So when we were going into Borneo, into the Mulu caves and the bird caves, of course, there's very, very limited refrigeration. And so what we did was wherever there was some form of cooling, that's where the insulin went. Whether it was in the bottom of the river in a container, whether it was in an ice box that had fresh meat, or whether it was in a very primitive refrigerator that someone was running on kerosene. In other words, wherever it was cool, or whether it was sitting inside the cave overnight because it was cold in there, because where we were outside was quite hot, as Asia is. So we just had to compromise, and sometimes we would have find a store in a very distant place, and they would have some form of limited refrigeration. So in would go Fiona's insulin, and in those days we used newspaper wrapping around as an insulation as well, which we don't use today. You're not allowed to use newspapers.
We're in the land of the dinosaur.
Yeah.
Ash, what's also really interesting when you reflect back on it is that I was on 30 years ago fixed doses of insulin. So I had this much insulin, so I was only allowed to eat that much food. So when we travelled in Asia, there was not a lot of rice that I was able to eat for that 3 serves I could have. So that was a real challenge for us to find other food that I could actually eat without my blood sugar going sky high. Remembering 30 years ago, we didn't have this flexible eating and insulin. So I got to become very friendly with like bok choy and all the delicious green vegetables that are so yummy over in Asia. Maybe not so cool for a 14-year-old, but very delicious now. But I definitely stayed away from the durian. That was one.
Definitely an acquired taste there, and you're so right in terms of the technology that's changing over the last 30 years. We're so lucky now to have things like Mid-Angel and Frio packs to help keep insulin cool and to monitor the temperatures and stuff. And it's so amazing to hear what you guys were doing 30 years ago when you were traveling or within that space, and how prepared you were, which is fascinating. And I know we've touched a lot about this, because it seems like a lot of your travels are sort of off track, sort of in the bush, which is quite similar to, I guess, sometimes when you're backpacking, which is quite popular among the young adults these days. So in terms of backpacking, would your advice sort of change? Like, is it more challenging to sort of fit all of your stuff there, or what sort of tips and tricks do you have, obviously, for that?
Well, I think with backpacking, it's just a matter of identifying the items that you actually have to have, and then just getting rid of all the packaging, and don't worry about whether the name brand is whether it's in a name brand bag or something. You just throw it out, because all you really need is that item that's essential to you, and of course. The one thing that I didn't say before was that you never know what is going to hit you. So when we were in China, Fiona had seen, just before we travelled, Bangkok Hilton, and she was very worried about her needles and so forth. And going into China, we were going through customs. And through all that area, we had no problem. We had doctor's letters and everything else, and that wasn't a problem. The problem we ran into in one of the customs was that the custom officer said to Fiona, "Have you got any bananas?" And Fiona said, "Oh yes, I've got bananas. I need bananas to eat," because bananas and those crackers were the main staple food in a lot of cases. And so on saying that, the customs officer said, "Where's the banana?" And I had no idea what she'd done with the banana. So we spent half an hour emptying every case until we could find the banana. And the problem was we never found the banana because her younger sister had eaten it. And so the thing was that I hadn't even planned or thought about what a banana was going to do. All I planned was the banana was Fiona's food, but I didn't realise the consequence. And then when we went to Indonesia, we were told we needed to take liquids and foods with us, so we took containers of milk and a lot of other food for her to be able to eat. And when we got off the plane in Jakarta, Pauline that's my wife, she was a bit disturbed because there was a lady following us with a mop, and she didn't know why the lady was following us with a mop. Well, the reason being was that the suitcase full of milk, containers of milk, had split on the plane, and so we were leaving a trail of milk all down the pathway. So, that again, I never even thought about that, but I did have the milk, and we did have replacement products on board in form of dried powder, dried milk. So as much as we lost the fresh milk, Fiona ended up with powdered milk.
That's amazing. And thank you so much again for sharing all of your experiences and your stories and all those travel and preparation tips. Just as we're coming up towards the end, are there any takeaway tips or words of wisdom or anything that we haven't covered that you would like to share with us today before we sign off?
I think I'd just like to say that it just all comes back to doing some research, being prepared, and giving yourself time to put all those things into place.
And the big one I'd like to say is that the big thing from 30 years ago to today is that 30 years ago we didn't probably have a plan to know if I became really unwell or had ketones or got vomiting and things like that. So the big thing that's changed for me in those 30 years with travel is now I have a very extensive travel plan. So I know if I get ketones, what I'm going to do, etc. I only worked that out about 11 years ago when I became a diabetes educator and thought maybe that's something I should teach myself. So my big tip would be that make sure that you're aware of everything. Work out all your ifs. If my bag gets stolen, what would I do? If I become unwell, what would I do? If I have a really big night on the town and I'm sick overnight, how am I going to keep my blood sugars up? And the other big tip I've been very lucky. I've travelled with my family and friends and my husband and my son, of course. So I've always got support. But make sure your companions know how to help you and where your insulin is, the hypo food, what to do if you're unconscious. And the other really cool tip that I love is that doctor's letter, photocopy it and just paperclip it into your passport and into your travel companion and family's passports as well. And the other one is just take a photo of the letter. So if you happen to lose the letter, it's on your phone because we all have phones these days.
It makes certain you have power supply.
Yeah, that's a really good tip, and I know I've started doing that more recently as well in the last couple of years, is taking photos of all my important documentation because it then goes up into the cloud. So if someone still steals my phone, I still have access to that in terms of proving who I am and all that information. So yeah, that's a really good tip, and also having that power pack to charge your phone up is also really important. So thank you so much, Fee and Kevin. Sorry?
I was just going to say, you might have the power pack, but remember you need an adapter. So make certain you've got the right adapter for wherever you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where that whole research comes into place. I know, these days it's so hard. You go, well, it's not hard, but it's sort of, that's the worst thing you can think of is you go to a different country and then you check in, you get into the hotel or wherever you're staying, and then you realize that you've brought the wrong travel adapter with you. So that's probably one of the worst things that could happen. Things run out, batteries need to be charged. So, but yeah, so thank you so much again, Fee and Kevin, for joining us on our minisode. It's been so good to hear about your stories and your experiences. Really, really do appreciate it. And don't forget, everyone else, to check out our travel checklist on the Be to Change website. That's coming up soon. So this has been put together by Fee. That includes all of her travel checklists, all of our handy Be to Change tips, and we will share the link once it's up live. Thank you so much for joining us. Any final words, Fee and Kevin?
You go.
Safe travels, and just be prepared, and there's nothing, nowhere you can't travel. Just dream big and you'll be able to do it.
Achieve. You can do whatever you want to do.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining in. Have safe travels. Have a fantastic day. And we'll catch you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.